victim outreach liaison. He received his Bachelor's of Social Work degree from Cornell University and his Master of Social Work degree from the University at Albany. He's been serving children, families, and the community for over 30 years. He looks so young, across several roles: therapist, playground director, division director, coach, board member, and victim outreach liaison. He's worked in multiple settings, ranging from a neighborhood center, trauma supervisor or survivors programs, forensic mental health, and community action. His work at the New York State Office of Mental Health enables him to integrate his passion for restorative practices developed over the past 2 decades. I am delighted to yield the floor over to you, Jon Rice.
Fanny, thank you. Elijah, thank you so much. And all of you, thank you for joining in your valuable time today to have a conversation. I think I have to say this is maybe part of the danger of reaching out to Fanny and saying, these forums are fantastic. I've learned so much. Can we talk? And here I am, very privileged, very honored to be able to be here and to share this with all of you today. So today, and I just want to say the Early Care and Learning Council does so much to enhance standards in care, to advocate, to support all of you as directors, supervisors, direct care workers. So I want to thank you all for that. In fact, in today's Albany Times Union here in New York State, there was an editorial, and it was basically in support of legislative proposals to expand access and better fund child provider salaries, which is fantastic. That makes good sense for kids, families, and the economy, because of all the shortages in the workforce. We need childcare to be able to free up parents and guardians and family members to share their expertise in other ways for our community. So my kids are 12 and going to be 14 on Saturday. I think we just stopped paying for childcare. However, I would gladly pay more and believe that we need to reorient our values to be providing that kind of workforce incentive for childcare providers. When I started working in Utica at a playground job that I wasn't sure I wanted to work with kids, I wasn't sure I wanted to work at the playground. I wanted to be inside for the day camp with kids 5 to 12. My boss said, "Oh, you're going to be on the playground," the hot blacktop in Utica. And I think I may have made $2 an hour. I'm not sure if it was that high. They didn't call it a wage. They called it a stipend back then. So I had a very challenging summer. In fact, one of the cooler parts of the summer was when this little girl, 10-year-old, we were doing a car wash to benefit a camp scholarship camp experience. And she took the hose, instead of spraying the car, she cooled me down by spraying me with that hose. And I was a 20-year-old kid. I didn't know what to do. So I just sat there and took it. And I was wet for the entire day. I decided I was going to do things differently. I was going to go back a second summer and do better. I went back a third summer, became playground director. And then I had no job prospects after college. And thankfully, my boss, who's still one of my best friends, 40 years later, said, as I was leaning on a cabinet, said, "We're looking for somebody just like this guy." He's talking to a coworker. And I said, "Fine, I'll stay for 3 months, Rich." That was my job interview. 3 years later, I came to grad school. And Rich actually was so gracious. He actually came to my graduation. And we still keep in touch. I have the code to his garage if anybody needs a place in Utica to stay ever. So I want to tell you just a little bit about my own experience as a family member. So my daughter Eva and I at night would sit together, and we would do what she called the chime. It was really a chime that they would do in preschool. And we didn't have the chime at first, and she would go ding, and we would sit there on her bed and meditate. And She would recreate classroom rituals and go around the circle, like naming names. She was so influenced by her experience in preschool that she wound up having this, quote, teacher box that we had in preschool. And one day, after she had left and was already in kindergarten in a public school, I was bringing my son back to get something. And she had the teacher box with her. And the director said, "Oh, what are you guys doing back here?" I said, "Oh, we found out this teacher box actually belongs in the classroom." And the director says, "Oh my gosh, that's created tension between the teachers. Like, where's the teacher box?" Well, my daughter had taken it from the preschool room and convinced me that her pre-K or her kindergarten teacher had given her this box. So we returned it in good restorative fashion. Please do not tell anybody where my daughter's whereabouts are. I think there's still a warrant out for her. So this experience was so powerful for me. Not only did they learn potty training by just being with the other kids at school, which, thankfully, because I didn't know how to do that. I cried with her in my lap. We were sitting at the ceremony for kids moving on. She was going to be the next year's cohort. I was crying the year before. When she finally did graduate, I literally could barely get the words out of my mouth to thank her teachers. I just was so choked up just thanking them for helping my daughter to blossom. The experience was also really powerful for my son. I wanted him to be in this integrated classroom like my daughter was. She was the kid, the typical kid. I was like, "Oh, can we get Eli in there?" And they were like, no, he doesn't fit in there as the typical kid. So we wound up having a bunch of preschool Committee on Special Education meetings and talking about his needs and so on, until one day the funder from the county was at the meeting and she said, "Yeah, I was at the daycare. He qualifies." So he wound up getting special needs assistance for behavioral challenges. And I think it's made a difference in his life, because this kid is so sensitive that one day we're driving down the street and he says, "Dad, pull over, pull over." I'm like, What? He goes, "Dad, that's the guy." "What guy?" "The guy we gave like donuts to, or Wendy's." So we go to Wendy's, we get a bag of food, and Eli is standing out with his bag out the window going, "Hey, I've got your food." He likes cheeseburgers, French fries, and soda. We gave him a mask too. That's my kid. And I think that's a big part of preschool for him. So the website for the council speaks about how directing a child care center is complex and it's demanding. And directors have to have an in-depth understanding of kids, of complex needs, of families, and running an organization. And as I shared with my experience working with kids and now having kids, it's challenging as well for the direct care providers. So I want to thank all of you for what you do. I want to thank those people that I might have a chance to speak with, that daycare provider again, because they did a wonderful job with my kids. So Elijah, next slide, please.
One moment.
Yep. And thank you for sharing in the chat as well. So I will say that a restorative approach for me is all about relationship, and it's about conversation. And obviously this is a little bit of a tougher thing for me to have a conversation where we can't all talk. And then, so as much as possible, if you could share in the chat, that would be great. So I'm going to start by noticing my breathing, because I can tend to get pretty charged up and a little anxious when I start these, because I don't know exactly how it's going to go or what I'm going to say. So as Fanny mentioned, I want to talk about this phase perspective, which is different than a stage perspective. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, her work was about death and dying, and people advance through stages from bargaining to denial to anger and acceptance. With a phase approach, what we deal with is, if we're fortunate enough, we stay living. We just have to stay living with the consequences of whatever is brought to us. I capitalize the word self, purposely to say it's a self-centered approach, and I'll explain that, and then also talk about these practices. Okay. Okay, next one, Elijah, please. Gave me a chance because I forgot about breathing. So let's talk about imposed change. So one of my mentors, local Albany person, is an author, scholar, internationally known for her work on chronic conditions. And what she says is that when we are faced with imposed change, which I translate as change we could do without, thank you very much, we wind up dealing with it. Physical health concerns. My dad had diabetes and passed away from that. I got diabetes when I was about 50. My first response to my doctor was, can I just say I'm in the diabetic range? Talk about bargaining and denial. He's like, well, you can, but it doesn't change anything. So I have to live with that. People who have an onset of mental health challenges, family disruption. My kids have now one of the ACEs scores, adverse childhood experiences, because their mom and I are not together anymore. So unfortunately, they've had to deal with that. And we do our best as a family to obviously love and support them. And my son says that that's a good thing because he gets 2 sets of Christmas presents every year. So even though we actually combine them. Natural disasters that normally would affect a region with a hurricane or a tornado or a fire. Well, now we've got this pandemic that obviously everybody is under. And then discrimination. When people in power, as we all know, have discriminated and oppressed others based on skin color, gender, cultural background, poverty. Those are things that are imposed upon others. And as a result, we can go through certain phases of recovery from those things and healing. Yep. So one of the things that happens, and Bruce Perry is a noted child psychiatrist, we've had plenty of disconnection in this pandemic and other experiences. The most traumatic aspects, he says, of all disasters involve the shattering of human connections. And that's especially true for children. And if you could just put in the chat, just some thoughts about that. What are some connections? I'll just mention the first one, obviously, is parents and guardians passing away, in the thousands of kids who have lost a parent or parents to this illness, and disproportionately so for persons of color in the BIPOC population. So what other ways are connections shattered or disrupted? I'm going to just put in the chat. So disruption to school and learning, yes. And even the criticism of the learning process, it's not like kids haven't learned. They're learning different things, but they're clearly not able to keep up in the same way. Quarantining, separation, political differences, friendships, financial, children's social skills. I may not catch all of these. Elijah, feel free to jump in. Maybe you can read faster than I can.
Socialization, resiliency, meetings and workshops are all via Zoom now. Eliminates the opportunity to meet and talk with colleagues.
Yep.
Attention and focus.
Oh boy, my kid is so glued to his phone. And I think that is a consequence of this less time in person, separation from older family members. Yeah. I wish early on we had called this what it really is to protect ourselves, which is physical distancing, not social distancing, because we still need the social contact. And people have found that. Drive-by birthdays, graduations, Zoom meetings, worsening depression, anxiety. Yeah, thank you. Lots and lots of disconnections. Teaching gratitude. Okay, thanks, Elijah. Next one. So this is a real quick schematic of the phase model. And the biggest reason I share this is to just do an acknowledgement, just as Fanny, you did a beautiful land acknowledgement. just acknowledging the experiences that people have had and what we have to deal with. And what Patricia says is that typically with any kind of imposed change, people go through a crisis and it affects our psychological realm, our physical realm, our social interactive realm. Oh, and Louise, you said you're tired of Zoom gathering. I hope you'll just stick with this one a little bit longer and then and then eliminate some others. So what she says is that people typically go through phases of crisis and stabilizing. Now, a lot of people, if things don't change outside of them and their systems, kid may go to the psychiatric hospital, residential treatment, which I used to be involved in screening kids for in a committee. And then they go back to the same environment and they're back in crisis and they stabilize, they go back to the hospital. That's getting caught in that loop. With support, though, people can move to resolution, which she says with support is the dark night of the soul. So I have a former adult client with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, horrible survivor of violence. That person thought they were going to die, went into surgery thinking, I'm going to heaven. Well, the surgery itself was successful and the person lived. And for 20 years since then, has been struggling with post-traumatic stress and trying to cope with those things and then consequences as a result of how the person was coping. That's an example of that resolution phase. Do I want to keep going? Again, thankfully, the person has kept going. Thankfully, we've been connected and can support that person in living and trying to get healing. And then finally, ideally, people with support, again, can move to a place of integration, which is living with. And with COVID now, we see long haul COVID happening. And for those people that aren't recovering fully, that's a place where people are going to have to find ways to create a new normal, to find a new way of being, to live with. And that live with is what my kids have to do. They have to live with the idea of their family isn't together as they started with growing up. People with diabetes or asthma have to live with that and seek treatment and seek help. So I just wanted to share this model again to acknowledge that it can happen in all these realms for you as providers, for you as directors, for you as families. And I'll just say too that since we're all under this umbrella, this is us as well. So even in my sharing this today with you, this is very personal. This is not, I'm going to present on some research and tell you about some data. What we're doing is sharing our stories and our experiences, and hopefully helping each other, just as in our broader system, we've been in crisis and stabilized, and then here we go again with the Omicron variant that brings us back into crisis. And even if we've gone through things, let's say it's been a childhood trauma, maybe we've even gotten to the point where we've integrated that into our life and the healing. Well, the pandemic comes along and that can bring up more stuff, and that's all normal. The good news is that once we've gone through these phases, we bring with us new skills. And I often have said with, with survivors of crime, sexual assault that I would have worked with, is you were alone in that time during the offense, during the abuse. Now you've added me to your team and hopefully others to your team. So you bring supports along with you to help you through this process. And I hope you are getting that in your own workplaces. And that even this presentation today will kind of spark some ideas about how to do that. Okay, thanks, Elijah. So the first thing to do in this process is actually to make a U-turn. No intervention is delivered without us. We are the instrument, so we have to be fine-tuned. Okay. So I want to share with you a framework that talks about us being multifactored. And so Walt Whitman puts this beautifully in his poem, Song of Myself. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. And Elijah's going to play a 2-minute clip for you from a movie called Inside Out that many of you may have seen. So it kind of illustrates this principle.
So, Riley, how was the first day of school?
Fine, I guess.
Did you guys pick up on that?
Sure did.
Something's wrong.
Signal the husband.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What is it, woman? What?
I'm joy. This is sadness. That's anger.
What?
This is disgust. And that's fear. We're Riley's emotions. These are Riley's memories. They're mostly happy, you'll notice, not to brag.
I wanted to maybe hold one.
What happened? Sadness?
She did something to the memory.
Is everything okay?
I don't know.
Take it back, Joy.
Trying.
Joy, no, wait.
The core memories.
No.
Can I say that curse word now?
What do we do now?
Nothing's working. Why isn't it working?
We have a major problem.
Oh, I wish Joy was here.
We can fix this. We just have to get back to headquarters.
That's long-term memory. You could get lost in there.
Think positive.
Okay. I'm positive you will get lost in there.
What was that? Was it a bear?
There are no bears in San Francisco.
I saw a really hairy guy. He looked like a bear.
This place is huge. Imagination Land? No way. Dream Productions? Rainbow Unicorn. She's right there. I loved you in Fairy Dream Adventure Part 7. Okay, bye. I love you. You can't focus on what's going wrong. There's always a way to turn things around. It's broccoli.
Congratulations, San Francisco. You've ruined pizza. Who's the birthday girl? Brain freeze!
Hang on. Riley, here we come.
Thank you, Elijah. So if you'll notice, that was called a major emotion picture. And the song was by Boston. Ironically, I got a chance to shake the hand of the singer of that song many years ago, my first concert. In that song, they're saying it's more than a feeling, and it is, because it's also a story. It's also a part that has a personality, that has many, many parts to us. You saw anger, you saw disgust, you saw sadness, you saw joy. So that's also a way of just kind of inviting you all to share a little bit more about what's on top for you, what's bubbling up during this time that you bring personally, professionally to your work, to this time, if you'd like to share with each other. Okay, I love the movie, thank you. It is timeless, yes. Laughter, frustration. Yes, hopefully there will be some, this is a good time to enjoy and to laugh together too. Uncertainty. Faced a little bit of that myself recently when I was in close contact with somebody at work who tested positive for COVID, and I was waiting for my test, and I was more anxious than I had been, not being sure, living in limbo, calmness, relief, conflict, fear, knowing it's okay to say no to parents, being pulled in directions, many directions, yep. Wonderment. Lack of guidance from the county. Yes, I just read this morning that there's new guidance now coming from the health department just to schools, because schools were confused about what to do with the new guidance. Unfree, mental exhaustion. Okay, well, thank you all for sharing that, and just to acknowledge that even in ourselves. Okay, thanks, Elijah. determined to balance my duties with maximum empathy and care for my staff to help us navigate. Yes. Okay, thank you. So you can click a couple more times, Ledja. Yep, one more time. So this is called the social discipline window. And this is a framework that has a couple different meanings for me. One is that it is a way of acknowledging these experiences that we have just as people are sharing. When we have high expectations of ourselves and others, except we're not so high on the support and nurture and encouragement, we might be punishing toward ourselves. We might say, oh my gosh, I hate that part of me that reacts like that. After doing many restorative presentations, my son and my daughter in the back seat, and we're going to get a present for their mom for her birthday. And my son wants to go to dinner and my daughter wants to go get the present. And they are like squabbling in the back, and my son is just screaming and being abusive in language to her. Well, that's bringing up some feelings in me. So I pull the car over on the, 2 of the 4-lane highway, and I say, get out of the car. Don't you ever talk to your sister like that again. Well, he gets back in the car and he's silent. I have just experienced a punitive part of myself. I wasn't real caring in that moment. And then I have a judgmental part that comes in. It's like, oh my gosh, I feel ashamed now. I don't want to hurt my son. At the same time, I want to be a good dad. That's an example of that kind of approach. When we're at that point, which I've also gotten to, even with my daughter, who didn't want to be with me at some point, I just give up. I don't care. I'm not going to try anymore. Sometimes seen as neglectful, but there's a positive intent about all of these parts, and that is that part's going to protect me from further loss, because it feels terrible that my daughter doesn't want to be with me, and I'm like, I've tried everything I can do. Just to acknowledge those parts that are burned out, that are tired, mentally exhausted. And then with another click, Elijah, we get to that point where sometimes we just say, you know what, I'm not gonna require anything. I'm just gonna do it for them, because it's easier if I tie their shoes for them, put their clothes on. You got to get to the bus. That was the same case with my son. We got a bus driver waiting for you. And I'm like, John, can you just give me one more minute? No, I got other kids on the bus. I got to go. Oh my gosh, John. So, or it's my son struggling with math homework and me saying, okay, look, a little frustration in there. Here's the answer to this question, knowing there's another question you're going to answer. But I did it for him on one of those. Now, I will say that he went in after helping him with his homework one day and he said, Dad, I got an 18 out of 19 on that test. He goes, except for the one you helped me with, Dad. Got that one wrong. I use the internet a lot now to teach myself math. Okay, next one, Elijah. Oh, I'm sorry, there should be, oh yeah, that's it. So, no, you were right. So I invite you to think about somebody in your life that you respect. And when they challenged you, when you didn't live up to your potential or even their expectations, how did they treat you? And I'll share with you this very fast story. Thank goodness there was no hotline call 30 years ago, kids fine. But I was driving a school bus for the neighborhood center, picking up kids after school to bring them back to our camp or our day program. And I have a new girl on my run. And I get to this school and there's a little girl outside the bus and she doesn't get on. And I'm like, okay, because she's here for somebody else. So I drive back to the neighborhood center and I look at my card and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't pick up this new girl. Oh my gosh, that's her. I rush upstairs. I'm on the phone with the school and her parent, and I'm like freaking out. The girl's fine. She's safe. She's probably in therapy right now. More business for me, I guess, but that's a terrible story. Okay, so my friend Rich that I mentioned hired me when I was 20 years old, put me on that playground. He's my boss. And he comes over to me and he says, John, I can't do anything more to you than you've already done to yourself. That was so caring. He had high expectations for me, and he also cared. He didn't blast me. He didn't write me up. He didn't punish me. He also knew me, and I was already doing that myself. So he didn't have any more work to do. But that would be an example. And again, that he's one of my best friends in the world. And I have always said, you know, what an amazing boss he is. So how about you? What kind of words come to mind when you think of someone who has been like that for you in your life when you didn't always meet expectations? You know, put that in the chat. And I thank people for taking the risk to share. At the same time, I respect when people don't. Authenticity, yeah. Thank you, Claire. Keep that word authenticity in mind, because that's going to come back. Empathy, you know, understanding. Maybe Rich had been in a place before where he was not perfect, and he extended that to me. Oh, someone cut you off completely. Kind and compassionate. Accountable, held you accountable. Yep, I was certainly held accountable. I wasn't told, good job, John, do that again. Person made you feel like a failure. Okay, so these are some of those punitive responses, it sounds like, or neglectful. The other windows. Thank you for offering that support to Ramona. So sometimes words come up like firmness and fairness and grace. Next slide, please, Elijah. When we have, a few more, yep, turn things into teachable moments, yes, and laughter. Made me feel like we weren't as close as I thought we were. Yeah, so these interactions are so powerful. I'm telling you something that's lasted 40 years. Other people, I'm guessing, can stir up some of those feelings too, when others have treated us in that, doing things to us and not with us. The goal is most of the time, if we can be in this restorative field, which is doing things with people rather than to them or for them, people will be more cooperative, more productive, and happier. And this extends to interpersonal relationships. It extends to the organizational relationships. And I would argue, or put forth, that it extends to our internal worlds. And that is when we have those experiences of, oh my gosh, I feel ashamed. I have a part of me that feels angry. I have another part of me that judges myself for being angry. If we can work with those parts and be authoritative leaders, both in our external and our internal relationships, we will be more productive and in a better place. So next, yep, one more click. And that is what an author, a founder of a framework called Internal Family Systems says is our core self. When we are in this place, internally, externally, we are in a place where we are at our best. Next slide, please, Elijah. And when we are in that place, what the founder of this says, and this model is being rolled out in schools, it's being shared across the world. And it's something that really helps me to best understand myself and others. When we are in this place of this innate, resilient, indestructible place that all of us have available to us, even children, although sometimes our parts take over when we're little kids because we don't have enough access to ourselves, like because of it, we have to be protective. But when we're in this best place, let's say as adults, we're in a place where we can show compassion, which is suffering alongside, it's witnessing. It's not empathy. Empathy can lead us to burnout. It's still a good thing. Compassion keeps us a little bit at a distance and we can still be caring. Curiosity, I wonder why it is my son would come off the playground and have a tantrum almost every day. Oh, I have a theory. Probably because we interrupted his play, not because he's disordered. Courage, clarity, calmness, creativity, confidence, and connectedness. So we talk about the disconnection. When we're in this core place, and there's some practices to help us be in that place, we are then more connected internally and externally. And this drawing actually comes from an art teacher in Connecticut where they're practicing these kind of skills. Amy Schaefer, thanks. So mental health. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a noted trauma researcher, very famous in the trauma field, wrote a book called The Body Keeps Score. He says being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. And some of those comments, really, we're talking about disconnection. The emphasis today is how can we promote those safe connections? Okay, next one. Well, restorative practice is a way of doing that, because restorative practice, no matter what we call it, we can call it relationship building, community building, internal leadership. It's just a way of thinking and being. It's about creating safe spaces, having real conversations, and those conversations may be inside us too, dialoguing with certain parts that help free us up for our better selves. For real conversations, deepening relationships and building stronger, more connected communities. And I appreciate DW, who shared with Ramona, even in this community today, offering that kind of care. So people aren't left alone with suffering, aren't left alone with their difficult experiences. Okay, so that's restorative practice in a nutshell, doing things with people rather than to them and for them, and approaching life with this sense of openness, creating safe space. Okay, Elijah? When we can be in that core place, no matter what's happening around us, that's when we can be the eye in the storm. Just like in a hurricane, there's a place of calm in the center. Okay. So when we are in that place of self, we're in a place that Bessel van der Kolk, the MD, says we need to add to our curriculum. He says we have the reading, writing, and arithmetic in schools, the 3 R's. We need to add a 4th R, which is self-regulation. When we are in that place and noticing that we have parts, because we contain multitudes, there's anger and there's questioning and anxiety and so on. But when those parts can be separated a bit from us, we are going to be better able to be in relationship. We are going to be better able to respond to others. And I hyphenate that intentionally, because if I've hurt someone, if I've hurt somebody, I'm probably acting out of some protective part of me that was wounded myself. And so I'm going to put up a barrier. I'm going to put up anger. I'm going to, lash out, because I'm not really paying attention to that person's needs. When I'm able to be more in my core self, I'm now going to be better able to respond to the other person. And I'll give you the best example I can give. And it comes from my kids who were 2 and 3. I started teaching them this, 3 and 4. So my daughter and my son are sitting on the floor. And I would say when somebody hurt the other person or me, we've got some work to do. So I'm sitting there with Eli next to me. He was, let's say conservatively 3 years old. And he hurt my daughter. And all I said was, how? And he said, how you feel, sissy? And she said, sad. And I said, how? And he said, how can I help you? And she says, just look at me. That's it, just look at me. Now, she denies this as a 13, close to be 14-year-old, that this has any meaning. I think it has a lot of meaning, which is just see me as a human being. You can't see me as an object. I'm your sister. She didn't say throw him in timeout, which probably didn't use anyways, or throw him in his pack and play, which I did use for some containment. She didn't say I want to hit him. Just look at me. So years later, I mentioned that example of pulling over on the side of the road, and I feel terrible and he's feeling ashamed. So we go and we shop for his mom, and then we go to dinner. And eventually he said, you can sit next to me. He wouldn't let me hug him before that. You can sit next to me, Dad. Okay. So now we're there and dinner's going on. And all of a sudden he reaches across toward his sister and he says, Eva, I'm sorry for what happened before. 10 or 9 years later, after teaching them those basic restorative questions adapted for little kids, he came out of that himself. And it was a beautiful moment. So those are my 3 R's, actually 4 R's of restorative practice. Building respect, which is to re-spectacle or re-see someone, relationship, and being better able to respond. Okay, next one, Elijah. So if we want to create community, this comes from work of a man named Sylvan Tompkins and a wonderful psychiatrist that I got to know, Dr. Don Nathanson, who was on President Clinton's Academic Advisory Council on Youth Violence many years ago. So they say that we can build community and intimacy and connection when we share our negative emotions, the stories, the biological aspects of anger and disgust, along with the biography of, oh, I had another experience like that reminds me of. When we can share that and when others can listen and acknowledge that, it naturally reduces the negative emotion. We're wired to feel less bad stuff. When we can affirm the positive, hey, I had a great thing happen to me today. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. As opposed to saying nothing. If we can affirm that, we will increase the positive. If we can promote and welcome all of our parts, not all behavior, parts inside us, and promote the safety in the expression, we will welcome, we will literally create better lives. I had a client that I worked with who was with me because he had committed a crime. And we were talking, and he was also a Vietnam veteran. And he's like, yeah, I don't do feelings. Well, we listened to him a little bit more. And he's like, yeah, when I was a teenager, I said something, expressed myself, and basically the teacher like shut me down. Done. Well, especially in these early years, if we can welcome all of that, boy, what a beautiful world it would be. I am so anti-thought police and anti-feeling police because I think we need to make room for all of it. Okay, next one, Elijah. So these are a range of restorative practices that can help us to create that kind of community, that can help the telling of stories. So one is affective statements. This is simply making a statement about what somebody's behavior, objective, somebody's feelings that I can own. These are how I feel. That's based on my needs that aren't being met. I have a right to my needs. And also a request, which is, can you listen to me more? Would you like to hear more? Would you like to share more? My kid's mom and I did this with my son when he didn't want to go back to in-person schooling. So we took him out and he's like, well, you lied to me. And I said, no, we didn't lie to you. We said we're going to go to lunch and we're going to talk about football or baseball and we're going to talk about school. So we went through this process. We're concerned. We've you haven't been on your computer all day, in class, even though mom's been helping you with that. He doesn't disagree with that. We really want you to go back to school because we want you to get the best education you can. Would you like to hear us say more? I won't float the chat with answers to that, but the answer is no. Would you like to share more with us? No. And now he runs out to the car. And I say to his mom, think punitive, lock the door so he can't get in the car. So he has to come back. Now, cooler heads prevailed and she didn't lock the car. So I joined him in the back seat and I said, Eli, can we talk? Can we go back and just talk and, let me give you a ride. So I brought him back. I got in the back seat with him. I held him. He's tearing up. The poor kid, he didn't want to go back to school until he got to his goal weight because he had lost so much weight by his own intention and motivation. He didn't want to go back before he was ready. He wanted to make sure he had good food to eat. So eventually he starts coming up with his own solutions. Dad, what if I ride my bike? Well, Eli, that's great, except you have to cross like a 5-lane highway. Sorry, can't let you do that. What about this? Now, his sister comes out and said, Eli, you get to eat with your friends or go to recess. He's like, oh, okay. Dad, what if we go to the store and buy the right food? I was like, yeah, sure. So let's go. So we're in Price Chopper and he says, Dad, I feel better about going to school. And the next day he not only went to school, he got on a bus to go to school. That was just simply using a 4-step process, which comes out of nonviolent communication. Affective questions, which I'll show you in a second. Circles, which are obviously happening a lot more these days, both in schools and in staff meetings. That's the idea that everybody has a voice. And then a formal conference, which is how I first got trained in this, which is bringing people together where there's been harm. This has been used in serious crime situations for healing, sex abuse, all the way to classrooms where there's gum chewing and talking about what's the effect of that. There's a very formal process. I'm not going to suggest people just jump into that. There's more training about that to do, but just to lay out the continuum. Okay, next one, Elijah. So these are an example of the restorative questions. Well, restorative practice has its roots in indigenous groups. There's a friend who was an Australian police officer who came up with these formal questions and brought these over to the US. And this is one side of a two-sided card, and it's frayed because I used to carry this in my wallet. And actually, one of my staff I hired years ago for a school social work job has given these cards to all of her teachers in her school, and they carry them in their lanyard. So if we have an incident, they can just pull it out and ask questions, which just gets people to tell their story. These are the questions I adapted for my kids. What impact has this had on you? Which is, how do you feel? What do you think needs to happen to make it right? How can I help you? So these are just, I think, really great questions to really encourage the expression of emotion, the expression of people's stories. Just give me an example. Okay, next one. So I'm going to finish by saying that just to talk about love. So this picture is one that I actually had on my camera, and I lost the camera somewhere along the way, and I've seen this scene. This I had to pull off the internet. So it's happened at least twice in a nature preserve somewhere. Alligator and a turtle are sitting on a log. And I say to the tour guide, how does that happen? How does this, like, one doesn't devour the other? And she says, we feed them well. Imagine that. If we did that for our kids, for each other, what an amazing world that I'm still working with you to create. Humberto Maturana is a Chilean biologist, and he says that love is opening space for the existence of another. And my theory is that that opening of space is about restorative work. That opening of space is about our internal work. So even if we say something that we regret, can we come back and acknowledge, you know, there was a part of me that really wanted to feel better or to protect myself or that was wounded, and bring care and compassion to that. Sometimes we can do that ourselves, and sometimes we need other supports to do that. Okay, next one, Elijah. So when we do all these things, we are going to be better able to create a healthy community where people join together and advocate and make changes. Okay, next one. And I want to go just to the next slide. If I have, do we have 4 minutes left for this video? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with this video and also invite you to stay in touch. We have some interesting workshops I'm going to be a part of, bringing self-leadership to schools. But I want to invite you to view this video and to remind you, if you have this already.
Have a nice mustache. 3, 4, 5, 6, 5. Nee, 6, 5.
Are you new in Baden?
Yeah, 8 months.
And are you alone here or with your family?
No, I don't. This life, sometime nice, sometime not good.
Hi. Beatrice.
Hafiz.
Oh my god, I'm keeping my eyes on you. Wow.
Oh.
Hello. I expect you to ask my number. Be a strong man.
Thank you so much. We will go to the zoo. Maybe next few days. Text you if you would like to.
I will love it. Of course. You can do it.
When I was looking into her eyes, I was trying to see what I could tell from the life that she lived, and I think I could tell that there was a lot of experience lived there.
It doesn't matter, look in the eyes or something, just give yourself a chance to talk and to look at the other person.
Wow.
So I thank you all. And with that, Fanny and Elijah, and thank you so much, everyone. Be happy to stay in touch.
Thank you. And Jon, is it okay if we share some questions that we didn't get an opportunity with you, and you can send the responses? Okay, wonderful.
Absolutely.
We want to thank all of you. I thank you so much, Jon, for being with us. This was totally wonderful and perfect for what we need right now. It really is. And there were so many great takeaways, as I'm sure many of you who are on Zoom today took away some really great points, great advice. We all just remember to stay connected, even if no more than looking into the Zoom camera and staying connected that way. I just want to, again, thank you, Jon, for all of your lovely information, your time, and we really, really appreciate that. We want to thank all of you who chose to spend this hour with us. You could have spent your hour with anyone else or any place else, but you chose to spend it with us. And we say thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you all, and keep up the good work, and keep loving the self, opening up the heart, making space for you as well, because you are so worth it. So worth it. Thank you.
Thank you.